Thank you very much, Wahid Baloch. Ladies and gentlemen, I hardly think there was a presentation in which the issue of enforced disappearances and internally displaced persons was not mentioned, so I will not be very repetitive about the issue. But as a journalist in Balochistan, I went and visited all these areas where the IDPs were settled, and I met the families whose beloved ones were missing. So interestingly, when I went to the IDP camps in Jafarabad and Nasirabad districts sharing borders with the Sindh province, I met a lot of people who systematically, continuously were telling me about the Bukti refugees rather than calling them the IDPs, because the people basically did not have an idea what the difference between a refugee and an IDP was. So basically IDPs are the people who are driven out of their homes because of a conflict. They are not refugees because under the international standard of refugees are the people who are driven out of their countries. Whereas the IDPs are the ones who have been driven out of their homes because of a conflict or a natural or man-made disaster. However, they continue to live within the borders of their own countries. Now, since the topic itself is so vast, there are so many things to talk about, and I have barely 10 minutes, so I'll try to stick to the point. Then the second issue is that of enforced disappearances. Without being repetitive about the issue, one has to understand what the missing persons are or what the issue of the disappeared people is. The disappeared people are the ones who have been picked up by the state intelligence agencies. Unlike the police, it's not the regular police that picks them up. They are not put into a regular jail, but into a torture cell. Similarly, they are not produced before a court of law for any kind of trial. Now, in the last, since the inception of the operation, what happened? The government of Pakistan was doing all these things simultaneously. On this side, you can see there were urban operations. In the urban areas, the government was very much involved into disappearances. For instance, student hostels were raided in Quetta, which is the provincial capital of Balochistan. Student activists were picked up and they were taken away. Gwadar, Turbat, which is believed to be the second largest city of Balochistan, kids went missing from Turbat. These were all activists. They went missing from Khuzdar. So disappearances, I'm talking about the time coming from 2004, they were predominantly a urban phenomenon. On the other hand, here you can see in the rural areas, there was a full-fledged military operation. Tanks moved, security forces were deployed. So in this process, people were forced to get out of their homes. They were driven out of their homes. Now here, coming back to the disappearances, when these kids were, or these activists, these leaders who were picked up by the intelligence agencies, they were subjected to torture, severe inhuman torture, and when the, as one of the speakers said before, that when there is a question, where are these missing people? So the government then comes to this stage, which is that of murdering. They kill them, they dump their bodies, sometimes under a bridge, sometimes in a trash, in the midst of garbage, sometimes on the road. So that's been the overall state policy. On the other hand, what has happened, in the rural areas, when displacements occurred, this was taken as an opportunity by the government to consolidate the presence of the security forces, such as the Frontier Corps, which is a federal paramilitary force. They started to work on the cantonments, so that was one thing. And then finally this led to closure. The area was seized, it was closed for the local people, the tribesmen who were driven out of their homes. It was closed for the media. This region was closed for all these international media organizations and human rights groups. Then there was also a transformation on the part of the government of ruralizing the urban phenomenon and urbanizing the rural phenomenon. So people all started to go missing out. Initially it was a process which was confined only to Quetta, Gwadar and Turbat. But now you go to any Baloch district, you find families whose loved ones have gone missing. But at the same time, it's very paradoxical that not a single Pashtun district has a single Pashtun missing case, for instance. Or I don't encourage that someone should go missing, but it's very, very much restricted to Baloch areas. Now victims, in the background you can see 3 kids whom I went and met. They were all below 10 years of age, and these all kids were compelled to get their kidneys sold because some of their kidneys had become dysfunctional because of the contaminated water they drank. The others who were financially so weak that they felt like their parents thought they had to sell the kidneys, and I told them to provide me the information about the doctors. They said no, they had a commitment with the doctor not to reveal the doctor's identity. So with all these three things, coming together, IDPs, like it's believed around 200,000 internally displaced people exist in Balochistan. They are from the Mari and Bukti tribes, and 28% of them are children. Whereas, statistics about disappeared people are still, unconfirmed, because like initial stats mention that like 5,000 people are missing, but this excludes all those areas where the media is restricted, where people are illiterate, people even don't know how to approach human rights groups. So then there is this organization called the Voice for Missing Baloch Persons, which even goes to the extent of saying like 13,000 people are missing. So statistics vary from place to place. Then, in the last 9 months, we have seen the rise of a new phenomenon which the Amnesty International calls the kill and dump policy, which was mentioned by a lot of people. So, in the last 9 months, in Balochistan, at least 150 dead bodies have been recovered. And these are like people from all over Balochistan. They are really the cream of the society, students who are like in the final years of their university education. Many of them were picked up from the hostels, and it's not as if these were secret operations. They were not secret operations. They were overt operations, in front of hundreds of people. For instance, the Frontier Corps guys would come and pick them up, and they would put them in the vehicles. And ironically, yes, they are the vehicles which the US government has provided to the Frontier Corps to fight the Taliban, which are only 120 kilometers away from Quetta. So now when this happens, that's what it leads to a greater humanitarian disaster. But at the same time, what I entitled my book as the redefined dimensions of Baloch nationalist movement. The more Baloch went missing, the more they got killed, the more the families of these missing people started to get out of their homes. In the Baloch politics, like women rarely used to get out of their homes, but the society has been drastically radical. Now, there was a report on BBC Urdu by Ejaz Meher some times back, and he was interviewing a small kid whose father had been killed. And he asked the small kid what he would intend to do when he grows up. He said he wanted to become a Sarmashah, he wanted to become a freedom fighter. So the more these things happen, the more radicalized the society gets. Now, how it has been the official response? I think I would be the only speaker amongst all those who have spoken who still believes in the government, and because I'm a journalist, so those who believe in freedom, well and good, we will write about it, but I am talking as a journalist who covered Balochistan. So, what was the government's response? Initially, the IDP crisis was leaked by Dawn newspaper under a report which was compiled by UNICEF. So the first official response was to expel the country head of UNICEF in Pakistan, who was a guy from Sri Lanka. He was kicked out of the country because the government did not want that information to be leaked. After that, media was restricted. No journalist, including, when I went, I am a local Baloch journalist. I was chased by the intelligence guys, and a lot of people were not allowed. So media was totally barred. Not a single newspaper in Pakistan, except for that leak part in Dawn, no newspaper covered the whole issue of internally displaced persons. And even missing persons issue is kind of a taboo in the Pakistani media. Then what happened, like Pakistan's largest philanthropy group, which is called the ED Foundation. ED Foundation did make an extraordinary effort to go to the area. Once they did, ED's son spoke to the media. He said the situation is really, really very serious and there is a need for some intervention. But the next day, the government of Pakistan told him to stop his operations, and he was barred from carrying out any kind of assistance. And the same was the response to ICRC. And so there was a denial of access to the area. To the human rights groups or to the humanitarian groups, and this obviously led to the deterioration of the whole problem. But at the same time, the official denial, which you can see as the last point over, was the most disastrous part of it. Like I, as a journalist, went and spoke to a lot of people at UNHCR. That in Sri Lanka, for instance, UNHCR supports or works with the IDPs. If you don't recognize these people as refugees, why don't you still help them as IDPs? They said we simply need an official request by the government of Pakistan that we do have an IDP crisis so that we will intervene. Similarly, I spoke to people at Pakistan Red Crescent Society. So it was very ironic that the Pakistan Red Crescent Society in Balochistan sent assistance to IDPs in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, but refused to make any inroads in the Baloch areas where the IDPs were languishing. Now, when this kind of a situation where the government denies the existence of IDPs, it means no makeshift camps can be established. So these people had to live on their own. There were not and there are not until today any kind of officially recognized camps of the IDPs in Balochistan. Now, predominantly the IDPs come from Dera Bukti and Kolu, which is the Mari and Bukti tribal area, and they were all forced to initially go to Nasirabad and Jafarabad, which are the areas, which are the bordering areas. But at the same time, they fled to even Sindh province. Even today, you find IDPs in Karachi, which is the country's largest city in Karachi, in Sindh province. So you find them in Jacobabad, in Shikarpur. So they are no longer displaced inside Balochistan. Nasirabad, Jafarabad, Bolan, Sibbi, even Quetta. These are a few districts of Balochistan where the IDPs are living on their own without any kind of official assistance or recognition. Whereas then in Punjab, they have trickled down to Dera Ghazi Khan, for example. So they have been displaced to they are all over Pakistan today. Then what happens? The government has inducted a policy of divide and rule. The government has inducted this loyal, tribal chief, so-called tribal chief, Mir Ali Bukti, who is anti the rest, and the rest are kept at arm's length. And if they're told, like, if they want to return back to Balochistan, they will pose a threat to Ali's, tribal status. So these people are kept away. Now, when I talk to these IDPs about the basic problems what they faced, the first one thing was settlement. Everywhere they went, they were viewed suspiciously. Even the intelligence agencies, their role did not stop. They went to the people and asked and warned them not to rent their homes to these IDPs. Those who were like relatively richer, they were asked not to give their homes to these people. There were no official for instance tents. So many of them had to live too far from these places. Now, in terms of employment, you see, many of the men, they acknowledged that they were exploited. They weren't paid as much as rest of the local workers were actually. Because the local communities, like in Jafarabad or in Nasirabad, in Punjab and Karachi, they realized, they knew that these people were in a dire need. And if you pay them half or a quarter of the actual wages which are given to the rest of the people, they will still be compelled to work. They will not refuse a job. In terms of health, again, I met a lot of women who told me a lot of women had died while giving birth to their kids. And then, but I mean, they used a very interesting term. A lot of my Baloch friends will understand that an old lady said, we don't talk about doomed. Doomed is the word used like for very, very old things that have been destroyed. So they were referring to the dead bodies. And the old lady said, yes, of course, a lot of women had died, a lot of kids have died, but we don't talk about our doomed, about the old people. So they were reluctant. But and then women said, like, those women with whom I spoke, they said they did not have any rural health centers in that area. They were always required to accompany their men, and their men never had the transportation to take them from, for example, from Nasirabad to Jacobabad for health facilities. Then thirdly, a woman startled me when she revealed that I know I have to be treated at a hospital, but I also know my husband does not have the finances. Why should I further trouble him? I know he has already been driven out of home and the intelligence agencies are troubling him. So she said, yes, when we fall sick, I still think I have a moral obligation not to reveal to my husband that I am sick. And she thought she was, playing her role as a very good wife. Education. Many of the schools, even in Jafarabad and Nasirabad, refused to give admission to these kids because the government schools, first of all, ask for the certificate. that show us the certificate of your previous school. And they were like, we were driven out of our homes at midnight. We didn't know where we were going. We were in a state of a military operation. So many of these schools refused to take or admit these kids in the education domain. Harassment is another area of victimization. These people, they're men, especially their boys, they face, for instance, every time there's a bomb blast. If there's a bomb blast in Jacobabad, in Nasirabad, anywhere in Pakistan, the government, of course, if you are an inspector general, you are required to take some action. The media asks you, for instance, have you arrested some culprits? So every time there's a bomb blast, the first victims are the IDP guys. They just come and randomly pick up these men from these settlements. I don't call them camps because there are no camps. So they're picked up randomly. Then they go to the other camp, which is the camp of disappeared people, or sometimes they end up as murdered people. So they face constant harassment. Now because of this, these men have to hide. Once they hide, this leads to economic problems for the families at the same time. Recommendations. I again live in the old school of thought. I believe that the government of Pakistan has to stop the military operation. It's not as if, okay, I mean, an independent Balochistan is a long time goal, but these people suffer every day, every minute, every time, every day their dead bodies are recovering. So what urgently needs to be done is to stop the military operation in that province. At the same time, international groups, when I talk of international groups, they have to be the media groups, they have to be the human rights groups and humanitarian groups such as the, ICRC, for instance, or Doctors Without Borders. Even those poor guys were chased out of the area, Doctors Without Borders. They went and they were asked by the intelligence guys to get out. Now, missing persons issue is very, very serious, as everybody talked about it. But you see, until you take some action, even the government of Pakistan is acknowledged so many times. Sometimes it declines, but when you talk of the government of Pakistan about everything, they just endlessly harp about one thing. That's that we have given a Balochistan package. So I'm not talking from a Baloch perspective. I'm not talking from a Balochistan's perspective. What I'm talking about is the Islamabad perspective. Islamabad came up with a Balochistan package. In that package, it was promised that all of the missing Baloch persons would be reproduced. That may not be a long-lasting solution to Balochistan's problem, because no longer do people talk of autonomy. People are asking for independence. As a journalist, I have to cover it. I can't help it. So, but what I'm saying right now, the recommendations within the Balochistan committee, which said all the missing persons will be reproduced either in front of a court, or if they are not guilty, they will be released. That promise should be fulfilled. At the same time, for the first time, the government of Pakistan acknowledged in the Balochistan package, it was their package. No Baloch political party was involved in devising that package. No Baloch was consulted in that package. According to their package, they said 1 billion rupees would be earmarked for the resettlement of the internally displaced persons. It has been 15 months since the package was unveiled in November 2010. So far, not a single IDP has been resettled. So within their own package, these two promises have not been fulfilled. And similarly, one of the problems is then whenever the issue of missing persons comes up to the Supreme Court of Pakistan, again they're an institution, the intelligence agencies come and they say these guys are not in their custody. Or one of the recent examples was when the Balochistan's Advocate General Salahuddin Mengal, he testified before the court of law that all these missing persons are in the custody of the intelligence agencies, Mr. Chief Justice. If you can force them to release these missing persons, then there is a possibility of a breakthrough. Within 24 hours, Mr. Mengal was asked to resign. The Advocate General of Balochistan had to resign. So similarly, the Chief Minister of Balochistan, the Governor of Balochistan, who are all their men, they're good guys, they have time and again said that that the intelligence agency's role has to stop. It has to be ended. So that's the kind of the solution from the Pakistani perspective. If they want to have peace in Balochistan, I think this sanity has to prevail. That's my take. If you have any questions.
Last 4 minutes. FC operation to be withdrawn, according to General Kayani and according to Zardari, there is no military operation taking place, and Kayani recently said in 6 months he will withdraw all the Pakistani troops from the region, including cantonment. Now, what is the role of the FC and Frontier Force in this? Are they part of the military operation? Or how does that come into it?
Exactly. I just wrote an article in Dawn, which was published 2 or 3 days back, addressing the same issue of the withdrawal of security forces. Right now in Balochistan, there is more resentment towards FC as compared to the army, because FC, like 95% composition of the FC is of Pashtuns from the frontier province. So they are very soft and very friendly towards Taliban because they speak the same language, they have intermarried, they have the same tribes. So FC is more responsible. Like even in your own presentation, you showed the pictures of Ghulam Muhammad Baloch, Lala Munir, and Sher Muhammad Baloch, who were killed. They were picked up by the personnel from FC, who drove like in a convoy of NFC cars. So they picked them up and they killed them within a few days. So in most of these, missing persons cases, intelligence agencies and FC, what happens firstly, like for example, if the University of Balochistan is raided, it's firstly the FC personnel who come and pick them up. So the families have a little hope that maybe these guys will be subsequently handed over to the local police, and a first investigation report would be registered. But that does not happen. FC hands these people over to the military intelligence or the intelligence bureau, and that's where they disappear. So Frontier Corps is not or withdrawal is not a part of the problem, but Frontier Corps is a part of the larger problem in Balochistan, where the chief minister says that FC runs a parallel government. It's a power center in Balochistan. Even the Inspector General of Frontier Corps, he gives statements on foreign policy. For example, this is Salim Nawaz has said so many times that India is involved in Balochistan, Brahmdag Bukti is doing this and that. These are the issues on which an Inspector General is not supposed to speak. But he speaks on foreign affairs, he speaks on defense issues. He is much more powerful than the provincial governor and the chief minister.